All right, folks. Second Nature is back. The Bro Pod. Aaron Lutzi, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great.
All right, let's set this up for the audience here. Allow me to set this up, Aaron, if you don't mind.
By all
I
means.
I called you this morning. I said, bro, I got so much on my chest so many things that I need to get off my chest right now. So today's episode, Debo's Docket. Okay. Lutzi has very little visibility into what we're going to talk about today, but there are so many things bouncing around in my brain right now that I think the Second Nature community would enjoy. I don't know, sort of meditating on in real time with you and I, Aaron. Does that sound like a good plan for the episode here today?
I'm ready to meditate. Let's do this.
Yeah. You just sit back and prepare for a deluge of various outdoor industry topics and things that are peripheral to it. Before we get to the main docket, though, Lutzi, I've got 3 very quick hitters, okay?
Hit me.
Okay. Quick hitter number 1. Remember in our last Bro Pod where we talked about the podcast network advantages and disadvantages? We talked about Joe Budden. We talked about Vox Media. You brought up HubSpot. And anyway, in the aftermath of that episode, I received outreach from 2 people in the Second Nature community, 2 very competent and experienced people in and around this industry who said starting a real outdoor focused podcast network is a brilliant idea, and aggregating those audiences across a bunch of different sports and communities is really the key to unlocking that non-endemic sponsorship. Things like Salesforce and Spotify or Shopify, things that we talked about on the show. Anyway, little mini galaxy brain here at the top. 2 very competent people saying that this outdoor industry podcast network needs to exist. So, of course, that makes me think maybe we should do it. That's my first quick hitter.
We've got all the numbers to call. We're friends with everybody that also does this stuff. So that could be really interesting. And I think there's so much variety out there, but also I feel like one of the other signifiers, which you kind of hit on the previous conversation, was that being part of a media network kind of validates the podcast itself. If you're part of Vox Media, there's a certain level of value that comes inherent with that. My friend, actually, one of my friends from Red Bull actually just launched a podcast and a media platform that's more political. And I think on the first day, she got 30,000 YouTube subscribers because she was part of a bigger network.
Wow.
And so, when it's powerful and when the value is locked in on that level, it's like anytime the network comes out with something new, which is another thing to think about, is like, not only could you put together existing podcasts, but what if you launched another one on top of that, having the resources that you have and the relationships you have? Kind of an interesting thing to explore as well.
Yeah. Okay. I think both these individuals will be appearing on the show in the near future to talk about this and other things. I don't want to name them and out them quite yet, but it's always interesting to bring some of that immediate post-episode feedback from the community into the intros of these episodes after the fact. Next thing, remember when we had that guy Rowie on from Avello?
Yeah.
The running shoe?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see their Kickstarter?
I saw like the first week where it just completely blew out.
Their goal was $20,000. They raised $186,000 on the Kickstarter. Shout out to Rowie and the Avello team. I wish we could take full credit for that one. Let's just, pat ourselves on the back for maybe hopefully making a little bit of a difference and getting a couple more people connected with the brand. But congratulations to those guys on a great Kickstarter campaign.
That's so cool. Validating for sure, right?
Yeah.
Almost $200,000 of essentially pre-orders, I would imagine.
Totally.
Very cool to have that kind of jump to the launch of everything.
All right, third and final quick hitter at the top. We already talked about this, I told you, but I bought an absolute banger domain name this week. I was sitting in my bed meditating, as I do every morning. Something told me to pull up hover.com, which is where I buy and stash and hoard all the various domains.
Wait,
that I've
how many domains are you sitting on right now? Because I called you out in the last podcast about it.
Probably at least 50, but I've got call it 6 or 7 that are very valuable.
Yeah.
Free Trail cost me $5,000. The secret project domain was originally for sale for $12,000. I bought it for $500. Maybe the best value purchase of my life
Such
until
a good URL.
this one. I'm literally sitting in my bed meditating in the morning last week. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should check out that old domain that was for sale for like $8,000. See what's going on with it. I bought it for $19, dude. $19. I don't know what happened, but it was like the hand of God touched me in the middle of a meditation. So now I know that I have another future Galaxy Brain platform to turn into some kind of a brand. I think it could work for various different ideas, but we'll see.
Dude, if this whole running media thing, B2B media thing doesn't work out, you could absolutely be like a URL broker, you know?
Seriously. I mean, I honestly want to have like a branding agency.
Have you
because
read?
I actually texted Ryan and Harmony this the other day. I was like, literally, I experienced no higher state of euphoria than when I'm like thinking about names and products and then like searching trademark databases, domain registries, you know, Instagram handles, things like that, coming up with like the umbrella architecture of the emotion that I want to convey in some project or brand. That to me is the highest plane of existence. And maybe it's a retirement project. I can have my own brand studio.
I think this is like a throwback to, I don't know, episode 8 or 9, but we talked about this a long time ago. There's a woman who runs an agency just like this, and it's called Eat My Words. And she wrote a book about like how to brand stuff, how to name stuff, and like the different tests that she puts in place to do it. And I mean, she's had some, and of course she shares like examples. Like there was a dog collar that like helps you find your dog or helps call it back, and she named it Retriever, you know, like stuff like that. But
nice.
like listening to those examples where you're like, oh my God, that's genius. I agree with you. I think that's like, what's the
dude, but it's two-word domain spelled correctly .com. I bought it for $19.
That's a steal.
Let's go. All right. Those were my quick hitters here. Launching into Debo's Docket here today on the Bro Pod. We got to start with something that you and I have loosely chatted about until I said, yo, we got to save it for second nature. That being Tracksmith moving into the trail category, officially launching the Overland collection. Couple things to touch on here. First of all, I want to give Tracksmith credit. Honestly, doesn't look terrible. Looking at the shoe specifically, like I've seen much bigger footwear brands make their first try at a trail product and showing something that looks much worse than what Tracksmith put together. You know, I've never tried it. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, just in terms of like the style and, you know, visual elements, the aesthetic of the product, but it's got supercritical foam. It's got the Vibram outsole. I'm sure it can handle a few miles on the trails. Doesn't look terrible. You know, the rest of the collection, you know, the vest is probably the other thing that looks the most novel in terms of design. It's got a zippered front closure as opposed to something that uses other kinds of tethering. So anyway, you know, then the apparel is sort of where Tracksmith that's their strong suit and what they're most known for. But they're putting out a whole collection that includes the 3 main elements: apparel, footwear, and a pack, which means they're officially eligible for Debo's Extremely Correct kit rankings at UTMB coming up here in a couple of weeks because they have all 3 elements.
Are they going to have any runners at UTMB?
No. And I think Tracksmith famously like doesn't sponsor athletes, which is actually something we're going to come around and talk about here in a minute on Debo's Docket. But anyway, they launched this, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, and the marketing elicited some spirited responses on the old internet. The world famous trail running meme account, your boy Scott Jurek, which is just absolute comedy gold for anybody in the second nature community who's not deep in trail running. You must go follow this account. Even if you don't care about trail running, it's absolute comedic gold. This person, whoever runs it, or this collection of people, are wildly talented. I often find myself just howling when I manage to find their things in my feed.
I love that. I mean, no one's safe, right? Like you've been on there a few times. Even the Pablo Escobar Debo one is hilarious.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, he occasionally takes swipes at me, but it's all in good. It's all good natured and well intentioned, and your boy can take the heat.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
the marketing collateral that Tracksmith was using, some people maybe found it to be a little forced, inauthentic. There was a taxidermied raccoon. Anyway, it opens up a conversation about when it makes sense to expand. And I felt like this would be a great place to just, give you a prompt of sort of like, what would Lutzi do? Because when you think about it from a business perspective, obviously, if you're Tracksmith and you're looking for places to grow, moving into the trail space with a little bit more intention, this is not their first foray into trail, but it's definitely their first trail shoe and their first like full head to toe trail capsule. Makes sense for them to do this on paper, but maybe the execution, if you're going to do it, you got to do it in a way that feels authentic. So maybe with that as your prompt, what would Lutzi do? This should actually be another segment of ours here, WWLD. What would Lutzi do? Your comments on Tracksmith's expansion into trail, Lutzi.
I was scrolling through the comments on their post, and RIP to their social media person who probably had nothing to do other than just hit post on it. But I couldn't find a single positive post in there. I kept scrolling, looking for someone to say something nice. And actually, that surprised me more than anything, that the trail running community was so strong and united of like the, hey, timeout. Like this doesn't pass the smell test. Like, you guys, come on. I would have assumed that the trail running group would have just been like, cool, brands are actually looking at trail running, investing in it, and supporting it. We're happy to have you here. Like, you guys have done some interesting stuff in road. But actually, it was the opposite, which was refreshing, actually, to have them be like, no, actually, you guys missed. And I hope that Tracksmith actually takes that feedback seriously. I think, on paper, this idea of like, oh, we should have trail running, probably a more considered and intentional approach would have been the move. And coming out with, and again, like, you'll have to correct me a little bit on this, but like going from not really having anything to pack, clothes, and shoes getting dropped at the same time feels like, oh, we made this, we got all the stuff right. We picked all the right elements, the outsole or the foam or whatever. Like we did the paint by numbers that we're supposed to. Here it is. Where, I think, like, to challenge your point specifically about, other brands have shown up with worse stuff. Has anybody recently shown up with worse stuff? Because it feels like there's enough of a playbook at this point.
Yes.
That this
Lululemon.
feels like, okay.
A brand that's 100x the size of Tracksmith.
Yeah.
Who probably has a huge team working on footwear, and I don't want to throw shade at anybody. And
no.
You and I have specifically talked about how much we respect Lulu and their move into running, but this is an example of the same thing. Tracksmith, Lulu moving from yoga to ultra running and having more of a road focused shoe, and then also releasing a trail focused shoe. Tracksmith, on the other hand, a road focused brand, a track focused brand, now pivoting into trail. I mean, it's the same challenge of like, how do you speak to that consumer in a way that's authentic, in a way that gives the product, if it's not terrible, and of course I haven't tried it, to give it a chance of being successful in the marketplace. Because at the end of the day, yeah, having a great product is important, but the marketing and the storytelling that you do around it and the engagement of the consumer is potentially even more important.
I guess what I would have done is moved a lot slower. I would have leaned into the East Coast story as hard as I possibly could. I wouldn't have released a collection. I would have found one product that really speaks to what we're doing on the East Coast, because there's something different about the East Coast. And I would have made it something meaningful to the runners out there and worked with them out there to do something that was really well considered and built out. And then I would have let that breathe, figure out like what's working with it, and then I would have added on top of it. I don't think they did themselves any favors to do an entire collection, because even if the pack is right, the fact that they got the colors of the shoes wrong, I think one of the comments was like, oh, these look like Skechers, or whatever. Um, all they had to do was get one thing wrong and they tanked the whole collection. I think if they would have come out with one really good product, then maybe the adoption would have been a little bit better and they wouldn't have had to go so over the top on the launch to try to like get in there. The launch felt really like intentionally cringe, and I feel like that era of marketing is also over. And so I feel like they missed not just on maybe product. And again, like I'm not the person that's going to be buying their stuff anyway, so I can't tell you if they totally missed or not, but it seems like from all the comments that they did, it seems like they not only missed on product but also on connecting with the consumer in the marketing. And so you've got sort of this double whammy situation where like like if you
I
would have
honestly think trail runners now, because there's so many brands that are trying to be relevant in the trail space, and as we've talked about on the show many times, it really is the collision of performance sport and outdoor sport. So it's really the only category where you have the North Face competing against Lululemon, competing against Nike in the same place. But I think trail runners are like kind of getting sick of these new brands coming in and trying to be relevant in the space. And so Tracksmith maybe was just bad timing of them being the brand that moved into the space right as everybody was getting impatient and starting to eye roll at these new brand entrants. But yeah, I don't know. It did feel a little bit rushed to me. I think that's a point well made. And it was something that I was going to bring up too, because my guess is they were trying to capitalize on being just before UTMB, get all these shoe reviews out there. It's clearly was seeded to many different media companies, not mine, unfortunately. Again, we don't do a lot of product stuff yet at Free Trail, but they didn't reach out to us. And anyway, they were probably trying to get everything out in front of UTMB because of the obvious significance that it holds in the trail community.
Yeah.
And maybe in doing so, they cut a few corners in a way that was reflected in the comment section of their Instagram.
They have such a well-defined lane. When I think about Tracksmith, I know exactly who they are. And everything that they're trying to do kind of runs counter to that. And I think that's where, they don't pass the sniff test of like, wait, we already know who you are and what you stand for and what you represent. And this is sort of kind of the opposite of that in a lot of ways. So just go back to the hey, we're
See, this is the challenge though. I mean, I wasn't planning to go here today, but it's definitely, I think, worth a deep conversation because I know Tracksmith has raised money. They have investors. I don't know what their cap table looks like, but it brings with it different priorities. And eventually, if you hit the ceiling of growth in one market, they have owned that lane, that East Coast prep school, track and road focused lane.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not going to be a business that's going to give an investor a huge outcome, right? So eventually you do have to look for growth. And again, this is all kind of reckless speculation. Businesses, I think, naturally want to grow and evolve and do different things. And this might just be a reflection of that. But at a certain point, your cap table sometimes demands you to make these types of decisions, right? And that's sort of where you start to lose authenticity as a brand to begin with.
Yeah. One of the things too, when it comes to business planning, is that we're so focused on these 12 to maybe 18-month cycles of like, we got to stand this thing up, put this thing out and get the result and then move on to the next 12 to 18-month cycle. And I think a lot of brands are missing out on either A, not planning at all, and B, not doing like a 3-year plan of like, hey, what would it really mean to be relevant in trail running for our brand? And how might we get there? Yes, it's going to take a while because guess what? We are the prep school road running brand and we're not relevant at all in this category. But if we do one really good product that super resonates with like the consumers that we already speak to, that allows them to get off the road and onto the trail, like actually the bigger opportunity for Tracksmith is really nailing people who are road runners that are sort of trail curious of like, hey, we know you're probably going to run in the woods and you've got all this road running gear. here's like a really good piece of trail running gear that you don't have already that will help you make that transition. And our role is going to be helping transition more road runners into trail by creating this piece. And then we'll build on top of it. And we'll be the good guys because we helped get more people into trail running in a meaningful way, as opposed to like sort of attacking the trail running market and sort of forgetting about their existing market.
Yeah. My point was more that like oftentimes I feel so frustrated being the owner operator of like a bootstrapped business that's often like cash constrained. But the benefit of it is that we do get to like really own what direction that we go in. And sometimes the trade-offs that you make with investment is that you don't necessarily own that. And you have to make decisions that are more based on the necessity to provide a return on investment to somebody else rather than what's best for the brand over the long term. Anyway, that's again just a bit of reckless speculation based on how it feels to me. I have one more prompt for you, which is going to lead me to a little bit of a galaxy brain here. But you know, the other like coolest brand in running right now is Bandit, a brand we've talked about a million times. So I wanted to throw to you of like, what does Bandit think about this? Because I don't know if you saw, but in Matt Trappy's most recent newsletter, friend of the pod, go subscribe, A Matter of Brand on Substack. He basically is doing an analysis of the growth of hydration vests and then, you know, sort of like the parallel growth of belts as being kind of like the useful tool for trail runners. And in his newsletter, he shows an image that I feel like he maybe just screen capped off of Instagram stories or something, but it's clearly a Bandit branded hydration vest, meaning it seems like Bandit is working on either trail or ultra focused product. And so Bandit, seeing the response of Tracksmith's trail running line, what do you think their reaction is? How do they maybe make their potential foray into this market a bit more successful?
I hope they learned the lesson of being intentional and not trying to be the Steve Buscemi meme of, hey kids, or hey fellow teens, you know. I think they learned, well, I hope they learned. And I feel like, you know, anybody in brand marketing, and I'm sure that, you know, I can only imagine the conversations they're having behind the scenes at Tracksmith right now, but anybody in brand marketing understands this principle of like being relevant, right? I mean, this is part of the deal. And I'm just more confused than anything of how we ended up in this place. But I feel like this hopefully helps Bandit also see like, hey, if you're going to do this, you know, be intentional about the way that you do it and do it carefully. And I feel like, did we have this conversation a year ago or so where Bandit, you know, even was like, yeah, we're not doing shoes because we're not trying to compete against everybody else. We're going to be very focused on the stuff we do, and we're not going to step on anybody else so that we can continue these partnerships with other brands in this space.
Yeah, but you know, it's easy to say that in the early phases of their business when it's growing massively, right? I have a ton of respect for those guys and those founders, and that sentiment of, you know, we're focused and we're going to stay focused. But at the end of the day, I think Bandit's got probably a deep list of investors too. I'm sure they've got investors knocking at their door nonstop just based on their momentum and the cool factor attached to the brand right now. So again, like we were saying with Tracksmith, the easiest place for them to expand is into trail. The easiest place for Bandit to expand their apparel line is certainly in trail also, but longer term, the easiest place for them to double, triple, quadruple the size of their business is to launch footwear. So it will be interesting to see how disciplined they stay to that. But it'll also be very interesting to see how they approach the trail market and whether they can do so in a way that feels a little bit more authentic. But this leads me to point number 2 on Debo's docket here, and a bit of a galaxy brain here.
Also, remember, wait, before you do, the easiest thing for a brand like Bandit to do, pick up Ricky Gates and let him lead the way. The end.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I know Ricky's got partners, but
I'm saying you got to get an artist and
somebody
let him
like
let him be a part of that. And you know, Ricky would be the perfect pickup, but like there are other people that are out there too that are really creative, interesting, credible, and allow them to put their stamp on it. Like, what's the worst thing you're going to get? Credibility through that voice, and collaborate with an actual trail runner. I know
It's true. I
this.
mean, it's so true. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but people connect with people, not brands
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And Tracksmith, maybe that's the biggest learning from this, is they didn't have a central character, a person who has credibility in the sport being the face of this campaign. And
Yeah.
because it was faceless, it felt inauthentic. Great way to close point number 1 on Debo's docket. Thank you for bringing that up, Lucy. Do you remember about a year ago, point number 2 on Debo's docket here, Bandit's unsponsored project?
Yes. Yeah.
It was either, I think it was the Olympic trials last year or USA champs. I think it was the Olympic trials.
Mhm.
Anyway, the US track and field championships were just last week or the week before, and they did it again, right? So, and it seemed like it had a similar impact. I mean, I think this is the second or third or fourth time they've done it. So maybe the novelty is wearing off, but every year it gives them an opportunity to kind of build their brand around this idea of giving people an opportunity in a different way instead of breaking them off with a huge check and a large long-term contract. They give them some type of support and a visual signaling that this athlete is on the market and looking for partnership.
Dude, the thing that Bandit continues to miss with that project, I can't find it anywhere on their website.
No, they were selling.
Are they?
Really? Well, they were selling like a cotton tee that had like the logo blacked out. It looked like cool stuff. But
all right.
Anyway.
Yeah, the unsponsored apparel line for everyone else to buy. I mean, I feel like that's something that resonates with everybody.
Yeah. All right, so here's my Galaxy brain.
Okay.
The Trail Running World Championships are coming up next month in Confranc, Spain. And there are 2 individuals on Team USA, Ryan Becker and Mason Copy, who are unsponsored athletes. And then the back-to-back short trail world champion, a guy named Stian Angermund. He is also unsponsored, but for very different reasons. He is obviously one of the best the last decade, a 2-time world champ, as I just described. He is unsponsored because a couple of years ago, he was found to have a banned substance in his system and had to serve a ban, though there's a bunch of circumstances around this that we don't need to get into. Either way, he lost his entire career around it under sketchy circumstances. In other words, the process in his case was very questionable, to say the least. He remains unsponsored as an athlete, I believe. So my Galaxy brain was, what if Free Trail could take a collection like this, these 3, and maybe any others that are unsponsored going into the World Championships, and do something Bandit-esque, right? And for us, I don't know how we would do it, but break them off with a little bit of cash, do what we can to make their experience there a little bit more comfortable. These teams, in most cases, are not super well funded like they are for World Track and Field Championships and Olympic teams, things like that. So would there be a thing where, Free Trail might be able to be supportive of these unsponsored athletes, do something like what Bandit did, and give them a better experience at what should be a career-defining event for them, competing against the best of the world at the Trail Running World Championship? So before I toss it to you, for us at Free Trail, right, there's no clear, legit path to return on any investment here aside from good karma. But you'll remember a couple episodes ago when I mentioned that podcast episode on Invest Like the Best with Jens Greed, the CEO of Skims, where he introduced the heuristic of, wouldn't it be cool, ... and letting that be the guiding light of your company. For me, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool from like a storytelling, a content, and a good karma perspective if Free Trail could in some way support these unsponsored athletes at the World Championship? Wouldn't it be cool, even if there is no ROI necessarily that's feasible in the long term? Comments on this little Galaxy brain here?
Dude, I got a lot. Because just like we were talking about on that previous bro pod about like how what makes Free Trail special is that you have, you're at these races, you're creating this content in the space. It's not just you in a studio, but you're like out there amongst it, right? And one of the things that I thought was really cool last season, there was that baker that you guys like picked up and like fundraised and like brought him out to a race, and
Yeah.
was it Mammoth Trail Fest or something?
Yeah.
And the story surrounding that, like I think it happened so fast that you really didn't have time to capitalize on the real story other than maybe like a podcast or whatever.
He
But
got a sponsorship deal out of it.
oh yeah? Well, there you go.
Joe and De Leon, he runs for Satisfy now.
See,
Awesome.
that was, you had a hand in that story. But what would have been really crazy would have been if you would have been able to document that. Like you talk about that peak life moment piece of content that you made around Hard Rock, but like what would that have looked like if you could have had footage from like the moment you met that dude into the conversations that you had around like, hey dude, we're gonna fundraise to bring you out to this event, and then follow him at the event, and then follow with what happens next. Like that piece of content and that context would have helped launch him even further into the stratosphere. And so thinking about how you might do that, and wouldn't it be cool if you did that? It would be cool if you had some gear to give them for the race and to sponsor them for the race.
Well, but they have to wear the team kit, so it's not like they could wear a Free Trail logo either way.
Okay.
Like maybe they could rock a hoodie around town, but
you could solve for this. But I guess what I'm saying is, what would actually be more meaningful as a sponsorship would be if you assigned a camera crew to them and created a piece of content around that. Like there's very clearly a story about this guy who is like sort of disgraced and coming back to the sport. Like that's a story. No matter how you feel about this guy, there's a story that people are probably going to want to watch. And you could be that, like, hey, as part of our partnership around this event, we are going to put a team with you and tell a story with you. And that piece of content is going to do something. And with all three of those runners, yes, like you could have them wearing pre-post event merch or gear or whatever you decide to make. But then the real value is in the story. And I want to pull this back to another situation that happened this past week with our good friend of the pod, friend in real life, Kate Courtney. She won the Leadville 100 in commanding fashion. She broke a 10-year-old record by 11 minutes.
Huge.
Shout out. Huge. Amazing. And what's even more awesome is that Kate came back from a broken wrist. She had like wrist surgery, everything, a couple months ago. So this isn't just someone who is like crushing World Cup top 10 results, decided to take on a race. She's actually coming back from like a pretty significant injury and then had this like transcendent moment. But what's really interesting about the Leadville 100 victory is that the response to Kate winning is bigger than if she had won a World Cup, in my estimation. I think there's something special about the way that people responded to her winning Leadville. And what I think is important and a big part of that is the story surrounding what had just happened to her and then going into this moment. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that you could create that reaction to these athletes with the storytelling leading into the thing and after the thing. And that's where the true value of Free Trail actually lies with these partnerships.
Right. But let's be real. That makes it 3 times as hard and 3 times as expensive. And if the whole thing is unsponsored, somebody's got to swallow that. I think that better middle ground, the more practical thing would be a sort of social first instead of longer form YouTube videos that require a team of people on each individual, instead doing something on social where we're collab posting with their accounts, telling a little story of an unsponsored athlete here competing on the world's biggest stage, and hopefully then getting attention for them, getting the attention of brand representatives around these particular individuals. Anyway, wouldn't it be cool? ...
I mean, maybe this is something Bandit could back, like an unsponsored series,
Free
right?
Trail X Bandit, let's go.
Dude, I'm saying, I mean, look, you got to start somewhere with this thing. And yeah, maybe a full blown like 3 different camera crews following 3 different athletes at an event that, yeah, I understand the outlay of cash for that, but also like you could start somewhere, and the social media place would be a great place to start. But I think like if you plan this for 2026, like, dude, there's always going to be
No.
unsponsored athletes at
See,
events.
that's the problem though. World Champs happens every 2 years. It's happening next month. So I've got like 3 weeks to throw this together. Let's see.
All I'm saying is there are always going to be big races, and there are always going to be unsponsored athletes. And yes, I understand the value of this particular event, but I also think like as part of your 2026 slate of content or slate of projects, this one could still exist and still be relevant and valuable to a lot of runners that are out there.
Dude, we've got some cool shit in the works for the World Champs that I can't wait to talk about on the podcast with you.
Awesome.
Anyway, moving along on Debo's docket here. Point number 3, Lutzi, did you see the new partnership deal between ESPN and the NFL?
I only know enough to be dangerous. So I think for the audience's sake, I don't know how many football fans there are in the audience. You're going to have to.
Okay, we're going to tie this back to outdoor here in a second, but high level details. ESPN is acquiring key NFL media assets that include the NFL Network, the NFL Red Zone, NFL's fantasy football platform. All that stuff is going to get swallowed and incorporated into ESPN. In return, the NFL is receiving a 10% equity stake in ESPN, valued at between $2 and $3 billion. So ESPN and the NFL, clearly they've been longtime partners. ESPN has bought a lot of the distribution rights from the NFL over the course of many years. The NFL now owns 10% of the world's largest sports media enterprise. Of course, ESPN is part of Disney. We all know what's happening with cord cutting right now, even though that has been materially damaging to ESPN's business. They still remain a juggernaut, both in terms of their impact on sport and just the brand equity that they convey in the marketplace of sports fans. Pros and cons, Lutzi, of this type of a deal, because, you know, you could see this being a way for the NFL to, you know, have deeper ownership in how their product is portrayed in the market. You could also see how ESPN, as a quote unquote journalistic institution, might have some conflicts here about how they might be reporting on the NFL, who now owns a significant percentage of their business. I don't know. It's a little bit interesting, a little bit murky, but also could be portend things in the future. And I'll give you an example of that in trail running here in just a minute.
So the ESPN distribution deal previously is what essentially funds so much of the athlete contracts in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like it's like $3 billion a year contract or something insane like that. And so most people
media rights are unequivocally the NFL's biggest asset. Yes.
Right. Like the attendance actually doesn't pay too much into the athlete, you know, those crazy contracts. It's really just the media rights around the event, which is kind of an interesting thing because I feel like in mainstream sports, that's always sort of been the way. Whereas in outdoor sports, like the media rights either are given away or the athletes don't see necessarily any of that in the, you know, appearance prize support money when it comes down to it, which could be the size of the audience is watching each one. I don't know. But I wonder actually if part of this deal has any impact on Amazon, because Amazon for a while has been showing a lot of the NFL games on their platform on Amazon Prime. And so is this deal actually something from the NFL or from ESPN's side, a way to block the other media incumbents that are coming in and trying to get a piece of that? I don't know.
It is interesting because CBS and Fox own the majority of the NFL's broadcast rights. ESPN, I think, only does Monday Night Football and maybe a handful of other games throughout the year. So it's not like they are the exclusive distribution partner
Mhm.
as it is. Of course, they do a lot of stuff that certainly CBS doesn't. I mean, people go to ESPN for the pre and post race content in a way that they don't for a brand like CBS. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of different ways for ESPN to put their thumb on the scale for their new partner here. But, at the same time, they're not going to be able to box out these giant tech companies who are increasingly showing more and more interest in being part of sports media and live sports distribution, which is basically the only thing that gets people to sit down on their couch at the same time across the United States at all anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I don't think the Oscars are really doing that. Other kind of award shows, it's specifically professional football that puts butts in seats, and college football to a slightly smaller degree. But these deals are incredibly important now. And the NFL has tons of leverage, but also it is the most important piece of their business. So they have to squeeze every last dollar out of it. And in this case, squeezing ESPN for 10% ownership in the business is sign of things to come, I think. And there's signs of this also in outdoor, Lutzi, which our audience, I think, follows a lot more closely. I believe, and don't quote me on this, I believe Warner Brothers Discovery owns now a piece of the Golden Trail World Series. For those who don't know, the Golden Trail World Series is this global circuit of shorter distance trail races that are so fun, so exciting, and so fun to watch. Last weekend was Sierras and All, which is arguably the most important and exciting shorter distance trail race in the world. It is objectively the most competitive trail race in the world, 30 kilometers in Switzerland. It had a fantastic broadcasting package around it that was distributed by Warner Brothers Discovery globally. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I have heard and I assume that Warner Brothers Discovery owns a piece of the Golden Trail World Series. So effectively the same model in outdoor sports world. And here you can really see it being a lot more important, is maybe that more impactful, or just like a more, what Warner Brothers Discovery offers is the ability to put trail running in front of a mainstream audience, right? Which hasn't really existed to this point. And what the Golden Trail World Series offers is, from my perspective, a very compelling viewing experience in an alternative sport, which just fills out Warner Brothers programming menu. So I don't know. Is this the wave of the future where, like, are we going to see YouTube buy a piece of the NBA or something like that?
Yeah, that could be interesting. I mean, one of the things that's happening in the sort of creator economy right now is that Netflix is basically using YouTube as sort of the proving grounds for content, right? Where they find a creator who's making sort of episodic content that's working. There's a kindergarten, like a childhood creator there. I'm blanking on the name, but then I think Miss Rachel, they pulled her over onto Netflix, and so there's more Netflix style stuff happening where they're using YouTube as sort of the foundational stuff for that to figure out like what's working over here. And I think, if you go back to trail running, the live stream for Western States actually pulled, I think, almost 1 million views at this point. So nice job on that. For you, like it worked. Like lots of people, you've demonstrated an audience here. And so is this something that these bigger media outlets are going to take notice of and start to try to acquire the streaming rights for big events like that? I remember you and I having a conversation when I was at Red Bull about like, hey, we got to live stream, these events, and like Red Bull could be the live stream partner for this stuff. And I think it was too early at that point to, like, how are we going to set up that many cameras? What are we going to do for all this stuff? And now it's starting to kind of come into its own of developing that out. I think one of the tricky things, putting my mountain biker hat on, when Warner Brothers came into mountain biking, there was already like an established player. And so they basically came in and didn't do it as well as Red Bull had done it. And so the audience in the sport kind of revolted, like, oh, I'm not going to pay $24 a month for something that I used to get for free and that was better. Whereas trail running, you guys didn't really have a established live stream program. And so whatever Warner Brothers does in trail running is probably going to be better quality than you would have had in most cases. And so thus it's a little bit more compelling. And so I would assume that Warner Brothers Discovery is going to go try to find more of that. Like, where are places where the live stream hasn't existed, where we can come in and add value and create something new that an audience of, 1 million people watching a live stream is not nothing.
Yeah. Super, super interesting. Okay. Moving on to point number 4 here on Debo's docket. Let's see, again, this is outside of pure outdoor, but we'll bring it back here in a second. The macro theme on my bullet point here is institutions embracing the creator economy. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple of interesting examples that are all sort of happening simultaneously, more in the mainstream. Do you know who Pablo Torre is?
Nope.
Okay, so he's a sports media personality, really intelligent dude, Harvard educated, but is also like, he's got a good sense of humor. He's got personality to him. He's not just some stodgy academic, though he's clearly like really smart. Anyway, he has a popular podcast called Pablo Torre Finds Out. It's owned by Meadowlark Media, which was a venture started by former ESPN president John Skipper and Dan Lebitard. I discovered Pablo Torre because for like 10 straight years, I listened to the Dan Lebitard show every single day, both streaming on ESPN radio and in podcast format. Anyway, his podcast is now being licensed by The Athletic, aka the New York Times, and they describe it as a 7-figure licensing deal. So who knows really what the terms are on that? Is it low 7 figures, high 7 figures? Is it over multiple years, et cetera? We don't really know, but it's still going to be owned by Meadowlark Media. So The Athletic is just licensing the show, so they're going to be responsible for monetizing it, promoting it, distributing it, etc. But Meadowlark still owns the IP. Pablo Torre still owns sort of the creative control of the show. In other words, the New York Times won't be telling him what to cover on his podcast. He will have the autonomy to go in the various directions that he wants to. But it's really interesting. And before I sort of move off of this, I was listening to a podcast with Pablo. He was on the Semaphore Media podcast, which we've talked about on the show a bunch of times. And he said something that was really interesting about all the creative talent that ESPN has lost in the last decade or so. People like Bill Simmons, Dan Lebitard, who I just mentioned, himself, Colin Cowherd. And he says, I pulled a quote from it. He says, if you were to collect all of those guys and just do the math on that, ESPN legitimately let over $1 billion walk out the door. Now they missed, I would argue, the future of sports podcasting, which was already in-house. So obviously all those names, Bill Simmons, Dan Lebitard, Pablo Torre, Colin Cowherd, now are all like big podcasters in the sports space. And as we know, a lot of things are like moving to podcast. And at the same time, podcast is like moving to video. So basically like sports podcasts are basically turning into sports talk shows, which ESPN has owned. So I think it's a really interesting thing that he's identifying here. Of like ESPN, right as the creator economy was on the rise, bet on their brand of just like, anybody can leave ESPN. It won't hurt us. Simultaneously, like we can use anybody off of our bench and turn them into a star, right? We have seen Pat McAfee, right, has the same deal as Pablo Torre at ESPN now, where Pat McAfee owns his show. ESPN pays him to license his show. He also is the sort of key character on College Game Day. Simultaneously now, Lucy, Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports is getting signed and used by Fox Sports on their Big Noon kickoff. So this is Fox saying we need to figure out a way to compete with College Game Day and specifically the star, Pat McAfee of that show. Let's get an analog, that being Dave Portnoy, who I know is a polarizing character, the founder of Barstool Sports. And now he's in all likelihood going to be sort of, I think they called him the voice of the fan on Fox's big noon kickoff. Now, simultaneously, my last point. The Washington Post this week, it was announced, they hired a new president of a quote-unquote creator network. And in the article that they published about this is a quote from the president or CEO of the Washington Post. It says, "This new unit will focus on building personality-driven content and franchises in topic areas that are of interest to our target audiences. As referenced in a previous note, this unit will operate independently from the newsroom and will report into me to create new commercial opportunities." So, ESPN, the New York Times, Fox, and Washington Post all now like really realizing they need creators. They need individuals to move the needle on their programs. And it's all happening at the same time. That's why I really wanted to get this on a pod, because I want to make a specific point here. But maybe before I do that, Lutzi, any reactions?
I mean, Washington Post actually did a lot on TikTok with their people, and they just lost like their top dude from the newsroom TikTok. So he went off and did his own thing. I wonder if he missed out on that role and was just like, peace. But they've experienced a ton of success on TikTok, basically just taking world events and sort of turning it into, bingeable content like that. And it has opened up a lot of opportunities, and a lot of those people have now struck out on their own, and I'm sure they're doing really well. It is kind of funny, right? Like the people who are these hosts on these shows on, linear television and whatever are sort of like the original creators in a way. They've just been supported by a network. They've struck out on their own, and they've, continued to do what they did with their loyal fan base. And I think that's it. They've built communities through these shows. They were the first to build communities through content, and they understood that that was a skill that could be carried on even without the aid of the network at a certain point. And so I think like no matter what ESPN does or any of these places, like that's always going to be true. But I do think it's interesting that they're sort of welcoming the creators back in as well. And I think that's the bigger opportunity for creators to sort of track in that direction. Like, I wonder what's going to happen when trail running goes into the Olympics. Like, seems obvious to me that they're going to have Debo behind the microphone.
Okay. But the bigger point here, I mean, it's hard to think of more important and long-lasting institutions in their various markets than the New York Times in news, ESPN in sports, Fox in both news and sports, the Washington Post in politics. Like, these are the incumbents, like the legacy of legacy media institutions now embracing the creator economy. It feels like this is an important inflection point moment of recognition that things have changed and the power is with the individuals, not with the brands anymore. And all of these businesses have major competitors of people that are personality driven, right? Like, I know the Washington Post has suffered because there's a bunch of political substackers who have amassed huge audiences who do great work, but it's just like one person or a very small team. They're trying to sell freaking paper newspapers and digital subscriptions, an ancient product in a time when it really is all about streamlining and about embracing individual creators, which brings me to my point, Lutzi. What do you think my point is here?
I'm just trying to hang on right now.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is what Outside needs to do. Coming back to our last podcast about Outside, they need creators in-house there. I couldn't name a single creator at Outside, which is our version of ESPN, our version of the New York Times. This is their path forward, and I think it's only a matter of time until they figure that out. Kyle Frost, I think, after the Inutopia acquisition or one of the last times we talked about it, I think posted in Slack something to the effect of like, I think we all kind of feel like they're doing worse than they actually are, or something like that. I think things have hopefully stabilized. They haven't been in the news as much. But if media is going to be part of Outside's future, this is the direction that media is going. And in order for them to be relevant in media, they need creators.
Yep. I feel like we made a similar point on that. What would we do in their shoes? And, well, can only hope.
All right. Was that a successful Debo's Docket episode, Lutzy?
Yeah. Yeah. It was fun to just, hopefully that was a good feeling to get all that off your chest. And I mean, it's all relevant.
Oh, so therapeutic.
All relevant stuff too. And, you know, you start connecting these dots of like what's happening on a macro scale, and then how is this also echoed in the outdoor industry, and also like what can we learn from it? You know, this idea of cross pollination that I'm always talking about. It's like, you know, I heard you and I were talking about it the other day. It's like every problem in business has already been solved somewhere else. You just have to figure out like where it's been solved and then apply those learnings. And I think, you know, watching this stuff happen in other industries and then thinking about like how might that happen in our industry, and how might we prepare ourselves for that, or how might we build that ourselves, is a really interesting thing. I mean, I think the macro point for me is that this idea of building communities through content, in working with creators, like going back to my point about Bandit picking up Ricky Gates, like there are incredibly creative, important, credible people out there doing really great stuff. And brands and media and everyone else would be smart to bring those people closer to the fold. And it's not about the race wins. It's really about the communities that come with it. I'm blanking on who posted this, and apologies if you're that person, but there was a really clever LinkedIn post recently that I saw, and it was about this idea of fireworks versus campfires, where an event, showing up at an event, is like a firework. You know, you have this big moment, your big display, you connect with people, but the relationships are the campfire. That's what keeps people warm year round. And what I think when it comes to creating content and building communities around that stuff, or the things that you do that are relevant year round, not just this one moment, that's the stuff that actually matters. And so by finding these credible people, the Ricky Gates and whatnot, that are doing cool stuff that everybody looks to, and really giving them a platform, a voice, and an opportunity, that's where these brands can really make some serious progress. And it's not enough to make product and have a model put your stuff on and take a cool or cringy photo in it. Like that's not going to cut the mustard for any sport, for any vertical in the outdoor industry. Like that's over. You have to have somebody that everybody trusts running your stuff.
Yep. Which brings it back to the Tracksmith thing. The lack of that individual created a vacuum.
Yeah, we went full circle. There
Look
we are.
at this full circle chat here. Debo's Docket, the Bro Pod. All right, next time it's Lutzy's Docket, and I'll just sit back and let you vent therapeutically here on the podcast. Do you have a BPC, or should we close there?
I got a BPC, sure.
Okay, cool. I don't really, so maybe I'll just go first here, because I'm using something that I haven't used much recently, and that is the do not disturb feature on my iPhone. And I gotta say, it is a bit of a game changer. I have so much, inbound throughout the day that it is very useful to just make yourself unreachable for a while.
Do you turn it off at any point, or you have it like permanently on?
I turn it on and off. I basically will turn it off. I'll turn it on when I go running in the morning, until I feel like I'm caught up on work upon return. Then I'll check in, and then I go back on D&D for as much as I need.
Noted. All right, I won't take it personally then.
What's your BPC?
Okay, my BPC is Path Projects. Flores hooked me up with some gear, and I've been using it a lot lately. I got the new hat on here, the new Saguaro hat, but also some of the gear that they have is super, super nice. Like the material is really, really good. Like he really thought about it. That crew is absolutely crushing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always kind of like trying out, testing new stuff, and this was a fun one to kind of test out. And I actually broke outside of my range for my apparel, so I've got like a navy blue top with like a little hood that I used to climb up Mount Hood the other
Oh,
day.
that long sleeve
Yeah,
hooded tee. Oh,
yeah.
such a good product. Such
hmm
a good product. I have 2 or 3 of those.
Yeah, I got a seafoam shirt that I've been running a lot lately too. I've never worn seafoam, but I'm kind of yeah, whatever it is at Path, they've broken me out of like the all black kit. So been
What are you
using it.
talking about, bro? You're wearing a tie-dye shirt right now. Legitimately, for those who are not watching, you are legitimately wearing a pink, blue, and yellow tie-dye Marin Bikes t-shirt right
I'm
now.
I'm I
Pretending like you're not a color guy.
I'm saying for on the bike. I would probably not wear this tie-dye shirt
Okay. All right.
while
All right.
I'm filming on the bike. I'm usually a black and gray kind of guy.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah.
although my bike is like bright orange, so I don't know. But either way, uh
No,
yeah.
they do have a good like sort of color scheme that they use.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like the colors. And yeah, I definitely don't have anything to seafoam in any other brand. So it's been fun to actually just connect with Floris and learn a little bit more about that stuff. We're gonna have him on the pod at some point. He's in the middle of writing a book right now. So
Yeah, I was gonna say Flores will be a great addition to the pod eventually. He's got his own podcast called The Ultra Milist, partner in Path Projects. He does a bunch of, I think, cool stuff. So we'll bring him in and Path. Yeah, definitely a very cool running brand. People should check it out.
sweet.
All right, let's see. Debo's Docket in the books. Thank you for being a listening ear for your boy here.
Always.
All that stuff has just been swirling in my brain now for the last week or so. So that's what the bro pod is for, isn't it?
It's out there. Yeah, that's exactly what it's for. We did it.
All right, buddy.
Sweet.
For Lucy, I'm Debo. See you next time.